Hey everybody, Mark here. Thanks so much for tuning in. And this week we sit down with Cheryl Fletcher to talk about our prayer series, Teach Us How to Pray. She kicked it off this past weekend, and this is one of those episodes where I probably could have sat and talked for another hour and a half. And if you have questions about prayer, I'd really invite you to send those in to us at 650-600-0402. It could be anything from what prayer is to why do prayers not get answered to tell us about different kinds of prayer, literally anything to do with prayer. I think I want this topic of prayer to be a conversation for all of our community to start asking as we're sitting down with Cheryl and Phil for the rest of the series. So please, I encourage you to participate there. And if you want to go a step further and consider coming to our spiritual formation retreat, which is centered around listening prayer, wow, what a great opportunity that is to just be up in the redwoods of Mount Hermon and focus on your relationship with God. So again, thank you for all of you that contribute to helping make this podcast happen, whether that is volunteering with us or by giving. It could not happen by any means without you. And so now let's go ahead and jump into the podcast. Well, welcome to the Menlo Midweek podcast, everybody. My name is Mark.
My name is Jessica.
And we have Cheryl with us today.
Woo!
Cheryl, what's your title today? We got to
Yes.
Yeah, no, I
That's
think
the fun
I
question every week.
I am the pastor of spiritual formation.
That's a great
It's landed.
I think it's landed.
That's
for
great.
pastor. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, that right. I am the central leader. I'm on the executive leadership team right now. You know, anything can change, but I'm on the leadership team, and I'm the central leader over spiritual formation, which includes the lanes of connections.
Yeah.
So our campus connections directors are a dotted line to me and our team. And the adult discipleship directors at each campus would be a part of that. And then we have a central team, spiritual formation team, which we just are welcoming today, our missional outreach director, Tim
Really?
Wong.
Tim Wong.
Yeah, you need to bring
Okay.
him on.
I would love
Tim
to.
Wong is for the Bay.
Yeah, he's for the Bay and beyond.
And beyond.
Nice.
And so he's starting, and if you are excited about that, podcast listeners, give Tim 60 days to get landed before you
we start
bug
asking.
him.
well, before you bring all your legitimate, probably, concerns and fears and wonders about missions and outreach and all those things. This is Tim's first day here at Menlo, and we need to
Welcome,
give him
Tim.
60 to 90 days to get adjusted, meet our staff, learn our culture, begin those conversations of listening and learning. So I know many of our listeners want to jump on to Tim's calendar, and I'm just asking you to wait a little bit. And if you have an angry rant about missions, send that to me before you send it to Tim for a little bit of time.
And then after that, you can send it straight
And
to
for
him.
those of you who've already sent me your angry rants, I love you and you're awesome, and I love your passion for missions because I share it. I'm passionate about missions and outreach. So we're excited to bring on Tim. He's our missional outreach director. Megan Cole, who's been on the podcast a few times, is our belongings director. And so she really, and she's also fairly new to the role, so she's getting her, stepping into that, which more of directional leadership to our connections team and then ultimately to our adult discipleship team. And then Vicki Kirkland is the rock star, and if Vicki leaves, I leave. So be nice to Vicki.
Wow.
No, I seriously do not. She's our engagement coordinator, so she handles really all things details and spreadsheets and PCO, planning center stuff, and she keeps my life together. And without Vicki, I really, truly, she's the one who holds us together, and she coordinates a lot of things. So sometimes she's on the front end of like retreat registration and those kind of things. And if you're not nice to Vicki, I won't be nice to you. That's all I have to say. I mean, truly, like, don't mess with Vicki.
She sounds like the Jess of your team.
Yes. Yeah, she is. Yeah, every team has that person, and don't mess with her because I wouldn't exist without her. Our team wouldn't exist without her. So.
Well, you have a big I mean, from that title alone, spiritual formation is a huge part of, I mean, everything that we're trying to do here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it makes sense that you'll have some great people around you. And we're so happy to have on new staff and
Yep.
to hear that your staff is growing. So that's got to be exciting.
Oh, it's so exciting. I
Yeah.
realize I really haven't had a team. I've just
I
been
know.
flopping from team to team since I've been here, and that is not how I roll. I've always thrived on being on a team, and I'm on a team now. You know, I'm on the leadership team.
Sure.
And then I've thrived getting to lead teams,
Yeah.
and so I'm excited that finally feels somewhat
Yay.
normal. Yay.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
It's got to feel refreshing. And I have to lead with this question. You have a little vacation thing coming up that also feels refreshing, and I'm so jealous about it. So you can probably guess what it has to deal with.
Fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark is my go-to. I actually borrowed a fly rod from you
Yeah.
one time.
Do you
'cause
need another one for this trip?
No,
You're good?
I'm
Okay.
flying, and it's not
Yeah.
worth it to do that.
So
But
my carry-on it is a fishing bowl.
well,
I
I'm
may or may not have
taking
done that
I'm
before.
taking my fly stuff,
Good.
and I just feel like I probably shouldn't add to it. And I think I have a 5-weight.
Yeah.
So it's going to be
That's perfect.
streams in Colorado,
perfect.
whereas
Totally.
I
Yeah.
borrowed from you because I was on the Russian River and we needed it. I needed a different weight, but and I'm learning that kind of stuff. So
Good.
you're my expert. Mark's my expert. So yeah, I'm headed to Colorado. I was on Young Life staff right out of college for 10 years, and they have a backpacking camp in Southwest Colorado called Wilderness Ranch that's celebrating its 50-year anniversary. And I was real involved with that and love that place and that camp. And so I'm going to the reunion. So I'm going to see a lot of people there. And I'm hoping to get to maybe throw a little fly into the water in that part of Colorado.
Cool.
And then my niece and I, she's a grown-up, she works in Denver. So after the reunion, then I'm going to head up, and she and I are going to head to Minturn, Colorado, just a little south, or I don't know, it's close to Vail, and do a 4-day fishing trip there. And we have a day of, I got to have guides because right now, if I don't have Mark, and Mark still has not guided me here in California, which I need him
Not yet.
to do. Not yet.
That'll happen.
But I don't do it enough, and I'm not good enough to not need at least a guide at the beginning. Like then maybe the next day or whatever, you can go out and do it on your own because they taught you what to do. But so we're doing a wade trip the first day and then a float trip the next
So fun.
day. And I've never done a fly fishing float trip.
be
So
That's when you
super.
just sit in a raft and
I
you can
love
choose
floating on the river.
Yes.
I
choose
just
how
Yes.
have a
often or much you
fish-
want to
yeah.
fish, or you
Yeah.
can just hang out and like have some
Yeah.
beverages, and they
Yeah.
usually pull off at some point. And you'll
Yeah.
have some lunch together.
So fun.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really relaxing.
Yeah. So I am very, very ready. I think everybody who works with me or has to do life anywhere close to me is excited that I'm going on a vacation. Because I've been
Because you're going to be gone, or because they know you need it, or both.
well, I've been, I've been leaking in some meetings,
sure.
where you're just tired and you're
Yeah.
not at your best, and we all need rest, and we need vacations, and we need those things, and so I'm ready for that.
Amen.
Yeah.
So that ties, in my mind, that's like goes hand in hand with prayer, which
Yeah.
is we kicked off our series this weekend, which was so fun. I love the bumper video too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
a really fun thing.
That voice sounds really familiar.
It scared me because I forgot
What?
that I did that. And when I was hosting online and heard my voice, I was like, am I unmuted somehow? And like, is it like, what has happened? And then I was like, oh yeah, Jubilee needed me to do that for him.
That's fun. Yeah.
But that aside, I mean,
It's fun. Yeah.
like prayer life is just how we connect with God, our conversations
Yep.
with God. And for me, a big part of why I love being outside so much is I feel like it's just easier for me to do it in that space.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so I'm very excited for you because I'm sure you're similar to me where you need that connection. And sometimes when we're in our day-to-day life,
Yeah.
as you kind of talked about, it's a little bit hard to focus, or when we
Yeah.
do focus on praying, it often comes out in an interesting way.
Yes. My place here at Menlo Park, when I lived in Pasadena, it was on my front porch in Pasadena, which was a kind of a somewhat busy street near a freeway. But my front porch was that space. Here, it's my backyard in Menlo Park, and I have a redwood tree.
you have a beautiful backyard. for
And
this,
so
yeah.
I try to pretend, because I do find when I'm camping or at a cabin or that kind of thing, my time with the Lord is just so sweet, and I'm looking forward to that in Colorado. And but this is kind of a funny. I've always wondered what my neighbors think, because occasionally when it's not this time of year, but when it's really, really cool in the morning, I'll make a campfire in my backyard, and I have a little solo
no
stove.
way.
Yeah.
And so I'll make a campfire. I'll have my coffee and my
my
Bible and my
gosh.
journal
Wow.
and my redwood tree,
Yeah.
and then my solo stove. So yes, I'm really looking forward to
That sounds
what
beautiful.
my connection to the Lord when it comes to being in those actual spaces.
Of course, of
yeah.
course. And I would consider you a very prayerful person. And so I think you're a great of this series, you're a great person to open this up and really just to hear the human side of prayer. So why don't you run us through your message a little bit,
Yeah.
and then just why did you start the way you started?
Yeah, well, I started the way I started because Phil assigned me that passage.
Yeah, well, that happens.
Yes.
And I will say that is the way I love to preach. Like I
Sure.
would way rather have somebody give me a passage to preach,
Yeah.
and then I can exegete it and be true to the passage as opposed to a topic to preach. You give me a topic, I'm going to have to spend 3 weeks just figuring out what passage
Right.
Right.
that actually speaks to that topic.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the temptation is to get a topic and then just pick one verse and slap it on there. And then you start exegeting it and you're like, oh, this really doesn't have anything to do with that. But we use that verse in this topic all the time. Anyway, so that's how it started. We're doing this series, and Phil graciously invited me into it. He's outlined the 4 weeks.
Yep.
And Teach Us to Pray, which is the in Luke, we're using the Matthew passage because it contained the part I'm used, and I think it's important. In the Luke passage where the disciples actually say, hey, would you teach us to pray? Then Jesus goes pretty directly right into what we refer to as the Lord's Prayer, the Jesus Prayer. People call it all kinds of different things, but traditionally the Lord's Prayer. And so Phil will break down that Lord's Prayer, and I'm sure he'll talk about it as a template for prayer, right? Not a formula, which we talked about. So, so he assigned me those verses, and I've gotten to, hang out in there since he assigned it. So that was fun. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he referred to it in his teaser as the skeleton in which the rest to hang on.
Yeah, which would be like, that's good. Skeleton or a template, like if you get a template for a
template's a little bit
workflow or
a little
whatever.
less dark of an analogy, but
Oh,
I got kind of lost in the skeleton.
Skeleton.
Yeah.
In your closet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you kind of started out by just talking about how we are all given purpose as humans. And then so how does that what does purpose have to do with prayer?
Oh, wow. Thank you for asking, because I actually had to cut.
I figured you would have,
I
knowing
really,
standard Cheryl, 7 legal papers, legal pads on
4
each thing.
sermons just
Yep.
to get to this one. Yeah.
I started, the original sermon began with a whole download on purpose, because what I wanted to do was connect our prayer to our everyday life, because sometimes I feel like prayer gets put in the religious drawer or the religious bucket, and then I open that drawer once a day for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or however you think about
Sure.
that. And what I wanted was to somehow connect it to, no, this is not just connected to your religious duty. It's a part of the delight that we have in belonging to God. And it is so connected to your purpose. So I took 2 pages of intro, which would have just been obnoxious. I preached one time and someone told me, they were looking at someone in the congregation, must have been watching. They were like, it took 6 minutes for you to get to your,
Wow.
whatever.
You're like, thank you for paying attention, first of
Yes.
all.
I was so thankful. But our purpose, and what I would have talked about if I had time, was everyone on the planet has a God-given purpose, whether they believe in God or not, and that is to bear the image of God. It's identity and purpose conjoined, if you will. Your identity is you are a image bearer, and then your purpose is to reflect that image and to fill the earth, Genesis chapter 1, right? So we all have this, for sure, shared purpose, every human on the planet. Then we have what I would say would be a unique purpose. And that comes from your talents, giftings, sufferings, wounds, family of origin, all those kind of, all the things in the pot come together to help us identify our kind of unique purpose, right? And then that is that those two come together. How do I reflect God's image in that unique purpose, whether it's to business or art or teaching or medicine or whatever? How do those come together? And then that's where you name your places. This is where I go each day, so I want to pray over those places. And we've talked about this, I think, but I believe in actually prayer walking those places, like, or going into your office early or your school early or your, when, like, go into, like, for a preacher, go in and pray over the seats in that sanctuary, right? Go pray over that space. You have a space that you go to, you have a place that you go to, and then you have people in those places that you impact. And so those are people, and so that's where your prayer life is suddenly becoming alive to, it's not just a list, it's oh, gal, this is how, God, I want to talk to you about how I live out my purpose. I want to talk to you about the places that you have put me. I want to talk to you about the people that you have caused to cross my paths on a random basis and those that I see every day or on a regular basis.
I love that. That's so good because I think I'm a task-oriented person. And so it's just easy to, like, do it because it's something you should do. You check it. You go to church on Sunday, check. You pray, check. Read the Bible, maybe, check. And so to actually have it integrated, not even just the language of in your life, but in your purpose.
Yeah.
Like that just like changed perspective for me. I that's one thing I think I've shared on this podcast too, is I struggle with like, what's the word? Like prayer, like sitting down and praying. Like I'll pray randomly throughout the day, which is not bad. Yeah. But I do think there is something to, and you talked about this in your sermon, of just finding your place and your time to do that. And that's one thing that I'm not good at, but just to have it more framed that way and is just like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I can do that. That's great. I love that.
And maybe I should have mentioned, I think a legitimate place for some people, and I talked to a congregant about this afterwards, could be a walk.
Totally.
But it's that you're kind of walking that your neighborhood or whatever, but your intention. You're not listening to music. You're not listening to a podcast. Your intent is I am walking and being attentive to God. So the good thing now in culture is you can put your ear pods in, because it helps me often to pray out loud if I'm in a private space. Put your ear pods on and they just think you're talking to somebody from work or whatever, right? Yeah. People are walking all the time talking. I remember when that first came out, you'd be at a Starbucks and you'd think, oh my gosh, that person is crazy.
They just
right?
talk to me? Yeah. Like I'd answer them.
Gosh. I know. That happened to me. I was working at a restaurant and I did takeout and a guy started talking. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And he was like pointed at his big old Bluetooth thing, like when it first came out. And I was like,
I love those.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, But yeah, so the purpose, and that's where when I started the sermon, Mark, what you first asked, I did kind of try to go through like things that might be a person's purpose, but how your prayer life would impact that, right? So I'm a pastor, so my purpose is to build a church deep and wide. But here's my temptation, right? If I only want to build it deep and wide, or probably just really, let's be honest, wide, lots of numbers, big program, I feel good about myself, then I don't actually need to pray. And the same point I made, many people in our their purpose is to be a parent, and the temptation is, well, I just want good kids who are moral and go to the right college and do the right things. And let's be honest, there are lots of really good moral kids out there that aren't Christians, that go to good colleges, that do, But if you want your kid to be captivated by the power and the presence of God, then you will want to pray. Not even you need to.
Yeah.
And that's what I was hoping to move people to, that subtle language. I don't know if they, noticed, but I moved it to then you want to pray. Because that's where you need to pray. I could have said, if you want your kids to be captivated by the love of Christ, you need to pray, But no, if that's your passion as a parent, then you're going to want to pray. If you're a doctor and you want the people that your patients to be healed, then it's not, I have to pray, I'm a doctor. It's, I want to pray. I want to pray for the intervention of God's power of healing upon this person, and his will, not mine, but I'm going to ask,
That's such a good differentiation, because I think that when you need to pray, that's where it goes back to like what I was saying with the list.
Yes.
But it's like, no, you should want to pray for these people that you're encountering in your life. It's great.
Interesting. And I think you use the language of like a good thing becoming an ultimate thing. And I thought that was a great way to frame that, because wanting your kids to grow up and be good people, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely.
But would you rather that or them live into their ultimate purpose in which God is calling them to? Then that's a different thing altogether. So I appreciated that differentiation.
Yeah, well, that's a Tim Keller. If anyone who's gone down the wormhole of, if you've listened to more than 25 Tim Keller sermons like I have, he talks a lot about that, good things, that's what trips us up in our faith. It's not, nobody has to go, oh, I shouldn't go down the drug addiction, debauchery, immorality, that's right in your face. Those are easy to identify, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not that they might not be hard to resist, and depending on your story and all those kind of things. But what happens in the religious world is we subtly don't need God, because I've just decided I will avoid these things, or I will do this thing, but I will take what is a good thing, I make it an ultimate thing, and I didn't recognize that suddenly I turned that good thing into an idol, right? I turned serving people or serving the church or whatever, because, and this comes back to what I talked about my sermon on, and what I think Jesus was really speaking to was motives, right? What's going on in you? Now, you can get crazy making, trying to, I can't do it until I have a perfect motive. That I don't think is true. Do it with your bad motive and ask God to transform your motive. Right. I've watched a lot of people be paralyzed by, I would serve in the kids ministry, but my motive is really not very pure. I'm only doing it because my kids are in it and I feel obligated. Well, that's great. Let's start there. Yeah. You start with your guilty obligation
and watch God transform it.
And allow God to transform it, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I also loved that you're talking about like a transformational view on what prayer is, meaning it's not a formulaic, if I say these certain words in this certain order, then something will happen. But more so it's leading towards relationship, or it's leading towards a different perspective of inviting God into something actively with me.
Right.
And so how can we rethink the prayers that we say? Because a lot of times, at least in my own life, it is kind of formulaic, where I find myself repeating things.
Our Father who art in heaven,
yeah,
hallowed be thy
exactly,
name.
something like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay.
I actually think written prayers can be really helpful when I'm feeling lost and not sure how to pray. I think that's the book of Psalms is a gift to us in that. Those are prayers that the church repeats. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but if that's something on your heart where you're like, I do find myself kind of getting in some ruts and all those things. I would just ask Jesus, how do you see my rut? Because he may say, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
And let him pour that grace out on you.
Yeah.
Or he may say, he may, like Jesus often does, and we see it in the scripture, he might throw a question back at you. Why do you think you're in a rut?
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to prayer being a conversation and not a formula.
Yeah. I think I know I deal with that too of like, if I feel like it's been a long time since I've had this good connection or intentional connection.
Yep.
And I often just am like, just like, don't be so mad at yourself. And I just totally feel God saying that of like, hey, you know what? I've been here.
Yep.
I'm still here. I'm listening. And it's just like, cool, sorry, thanks, love you, bye. It's just this like, it's just so powerful when you actually like, I think the conversation piece too of like, it's so easy for us just to spit out all of the things we want. But when we actually allow God to speak back into it, sometimes it's just this overwhelming sense of grace. It's okay, I'm here.
Yeah, I think so many of our relationships can become transactional. And so that's the temptation with prayer, is to view it as a transaction.
Right.
I'm going to be friends with this person because of what they can offer to me.
Sure.
I'm going to set up, we can do this with people we love. It's not just in the business world or whatever. We can say, I'm going to do date nights with my spouse as a transaction, right? If I do the date nights, then my spouse owes me whatever, right? We can do that with our kids. If I'm doing these things to get my kid or my friend or whatever, and I don't think we consciously think that. I don't think we're even probably conscious typically of the transaction of what I'm doing this to produce this, right? And I was with, I can't name the country they were from. I was with some folks who are from a very, very closed country, came just last week. They were here in the States, and we got coffee here in Menlo Park. And I met them in that country in 2019. And these are all people who've come to faith out of, they were Muslim, and to come to faith in Jesus would create persecution. I think pretty much every one of them has been hauled in by the police at certain times or this or that. So we were talking about prayer and the power of prayer and what they're seeing God do. And these are people, they want God's presence and power to show up in their country and in their city. And so they gather and they pray and they pray and they pray. And one of them, I wrote notes because they were just, everything they were saying, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. But one of the guys said, in the Quran or for a Muslim, prayer can just become repeated. If I say it this many times, again, it's very transactional. And so one of the things as they're discipling people into a life with Jesus or who have just stepped into a life with Jesus, he said, I always tell them that different than maybe the prayer that they had experienced, the prayer with Jesus is a prayer into the heart of God. It's an invitation into the Father's heart. And so how do we somehow shift our mind from a transactional relationship to a relationship that is fully embracing the heart of the other person? It's a relationship that is focused on knowing more than getting. So,
and I think that's what you're trying to illustrate when you use language like prayer is more than what we're praying about, but more so who we're praying to.
Yeah. So
I love that. And then you ended with an acronym. Acronym?
Yeah. I included it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is my version of that acronym.
Okay.
I'll just say that because you can Google it. Other people use it in different ways. my way is what I said was P is praise. Most people that's it. Praise. Just getting. I think it helps as I'm centering into prayer to begin with affirmations of God, like thank you, God, for God, I praise you for, kind of moving it off of me and to Him. And then R, for me, is relate. To remember that this is a conversation. It's relating to God. It's being in conversation with Him. It's meeting with Him. It involves listening. It involves asking questions, all those things. Then, of course, A, ask. I do think, and we'll see this in the Lord's Prayer. There are things to ask for. Jesus says this, ask and you will receive, all that kind of stuff. So ask, there is a component. But I did, when I shared it in the sermon, I wanted to make sure that people understood not just asking for, but asking questions. Ask Him, like that with, God, how do you see this rut that I'm in? And then pause, let Him speak to you about that as best you know, and you could be wrong. You could hear Him wrong. We are all messed up, and we can tend to want to hear what we want to hear, all that. Be aware of that. Be aware of that thing. And then why is yield. Yield, it's like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Hey, Father, I would really like this cup to pass. I do not want to do this, but your will, not mine. That's our yielding.
Yeah.
That's the posture of prayer.
The one that Matt Stefan taught me actually was taco prayer.
Oh, okay.
So it's T is Thanksgiving, A, adoration, C, confession, O is others, and S is self.
There you go.
And
Yeah,
I've also heard
close.
ACTS,
Yeah.
ACTS is
Yep.
another one.
Yeah.
Very similar.
And then
Yeah.
I've changed it with some friends to cats at one point.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that you're starting
Yeah.
with confession. It's kind of, anyway, all the things,
Yeah.
just things to help you to kind of give you that, again, a template, a way of thinking about if that's helpful.
Awesome. Well, we put out on Instagram, socials, that kind of thing, just a blanket. What questions do you have around prayer? And so we have some that have came in. Some we've already talked about a little bit, and I'd love for you to just to kind of either drill in or just remind what you've already said. First one that came in, we kind of talked about this earlier, is I understand prayer, but if Jesus already knows that we're going to pray, why do we need to pray? Something along those lines.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
well, in that passage that we were in,
Is that Matthew? Or
Matthew, he says
5 or 6?
He says in 6, at the end of the section that I preached, he says, Jesus says, "Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him."
Right. Yeah.
And so that goes along with the transactional thing. If my prayer life is only transactional to get something, then maybe I don't need to pray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if my prayer life is relational, not transactional, if it's an invitation into the heart of God, if it's the fatherhood of God, it's meeting with Him, then His knowledge doesn't take away the conversation.
Yeah.
So a little example of that is you and Missy, your wife, right? Sometimes she shares with you things you already know. Do you just shut her down and go, I know that? Maybe you do sometimes. On a bad day, you might.
Man, when I met my husband, Lois,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, you might. Like, I already know that.
Yeah.
I already know that.
Yep.
Now, I think in your better days, you, even though you know, you invite her to tell you more.
Yeah.
You ask questions about it.
Sure.
And I think that's what happens in prayer is that He knows. And He knows, and He knows your answers. But He wants to be in conversation. You do that because here's the deal. If it was just transactional, even here, you're not all-knowing like God is all-knowing. God can't turn off His all-knowingness, okay? Now, we could go down a theological wormhole on what does God know and how much does He know? And I'm pretty much in the full sovereignty of God camp. And I know that my open theism friends would say, I still believe in the full sovereignty of God. I just believe He doesn't know these things. But open theism friends, we can chat more. Anyway, but again, if it's just back to your marriage, you could just, you could say to Missy, hey, everything you need me to do and want me to do or want me to know, why don't you just send me an email tomorrow and list it? Well, it's a form of communication.
I can see that going over really well.
Yeah, I can too.
But I think some things that are helpful to me on that question,
Yep.
I don't have a definitive answer on that. What is it that God, he already knows. But I think of John chapter 15, where Jesus says some things that also create some confusion, but in the context. So John chapter 15, this is in the context of the passage where he's talking about the vine and the branch, right? And he says, he's trying to tell them, you cannot do anything apart from me. Well, you can do a lot of things apart from him, right? But what he's pointing out again is that now your God-given, everyone in the world has it, purpose to bear his image, to reflect him, is really hard to do apart from him. So you need to be connected to him. The kingdom people are defined by their connection to Jesus. And so he lays that out, and then in verse 7, he says, if you remain in me, or another version would say abide in me, the language of remain, and that remain is good. It is this sticking to, staying with. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. So you could take that verse and make it a formula or a demand, or you're trying to figure out, he said, or you're just disappointed and frustrated because he said, ask whatever you wish and it'll be done for you. So either there's something wrong with God or there's something wrong with me. I'm not remaining well enough. I'm not abiding well enough, whatever. But it's interesting that he says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, and not you remain in my words, again, there's this relationship kind of here. Words are relationship. And this is what's so crazy about our God, is that he has spoken to us in words. The written word, in his sovereignty, he designed that we would get a written word. Didn't have to do that. The word that comes through his spirit, that the written word being produced by the inspiration of the Spirit, all those things. So here he's got this connectedness, and I might suggest that as we're connected to him, as his words invade our life, my prayers are transformed into what I wish becomes what he wishes. I mean, it's Jesus' prayer in the garden, right?
Yep.
Jesus tells him, I want to not drink this cup. But it doesn't stop at, I don't want to drink this cup. And now, like here, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. Now, in this formula, if we make it a formula, Jesus says, I don't want to drink the cup. God says, okay. But Jesus says, I don't want to drink the cup. But he's so connected to the Father, he wouldn't want anything that's not the will of the Father. So he is clear about, hey, here's the honest truth. I'm not, you already know my thoughts. You already know what I feel. But you also know that in the deepest part of me, I only want your will. Right. And so the Father says no. And then further down in this passage, he says, and he says this after, remember, he says, verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you, which is so profound. And the Father loved Jesus enough to say no to him in the garden. He loved him enough to actually answer with what was at the deepest part of Jesus's longings and desires. He will say no to you if it goes against your purpose. And your purpose is to live connected to the vine, connected to Jesus, reflecting him, worshiping him, giving him glory. So he's going to say no, because he's going to say no to what is against who you really are.
Yep.
Right?
Wow.
And then later he says in verse 15, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. Now, are we sometimes unwilling to hear what he's telling us? I mean, he's saying, I've made it known to you. Everything I've learned from the Father, I've made known to you. I will make known to you. Sometimes I hear it wrong because I still have a condition of sin. I've been rescued from it, but we're in the now and not yet stage, right? So he says, you're my friend. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. That, again, is part of that God-given purpose, unique purpose, as a follower of Jesus, unique purpose to go bear fruit, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Okay, again, he repeats that. But I think we have to understand that he's only going to give you what is best for you. But here's the problem. I'm messed up.
Yeah.
I do not always know what is best for me.
Right.
I don't know who said it this way, but if I knew what God knew, then I would pray differently, right? And so that's what part of our journey of relationship is, to not just go, well, I can never know what God knows. Jesus says here, I make known to you. So that's my journey. I would hope that, you and Missy, how long did you guys dated for quite a while and broke up a few times and did some, yeah. Okay, so you knew, you know, how many years did you know each other before you got married?
4,
Okay.
5, 6, 7, 8,
Okay.
9 years.
Okay, so you'd probably, okay.
Well, 4 years
When-
before we
I was
started
like
dating.
4.
And then
Okay.
5 years.
Right, okay,
After
even better.
that-ish.
Like you were friends.
Ish. Yeah.
You've probably even maybe knew each other's families or met a sibling or somebody along the way, a parent or whatever.
Yep.
So you go, you get married, you come back from your honeymoon and you go, well, I know everything I need to know about you. I mean, we've known each other now 9 years, so please don't tell me anything that I already know.
Yeah.
No, you're on a journey for
Right.
the rest of your marriage to know more and more. Because you neither one of you are God, so both of you are having to mine the other person to learn about them.
Yeah.
And then here's what they're having to do and what you're having to do for Missy. Missy wants to know you, but guess what? You don't even fully know yourself.
That's true.
So this is your journey together in relationship. Right? So I don't have a perfect answer to the, if he already knows what. Well, here's my perfect answer. If he already knows, why do I pray? Well, don't pray if your relationship with God is just transactional. Don't waste your time.
Interesting.
But if your relationship with God is relational, then you want to pray. I don't have to tell you to pray. I don't tell you have to pray, because you don't have to pray. The universe isn't going to fall off of its axis because Cheryl Fletcher stopped praying.
Sure.
So what does it mean to want to pray? And then I have one more verse,
Okay.
and I'll stop preaching. But I've shared this with so many people. I have read this verse. I have preached this verse. And I don't know why I missed this till I mentioned I was at that place with a group of pastors and Christian leaders where we did the meditation on God's love for us and all that kind of stuff. I think it was the same retreatish thing that we also looked at. Might have been a different one, but we looked at this passage in Exodus where Moses, of course, comes off the mountain. All of his people are worshiping a little golden calf that they, we always worship God. Now they're dancing around a golden calf they made and idolatry and all that kind of stuff. And Moses is just done, right? Like he's just done. Like, take me out, Lord. I don't want to lead these people anymore. Anyway, but he comes together and he's like, God, I don't want to go if you're not going to go with us. And then it talks about in Exodus 33, it talks about that, and it talks about that Moses would, He says, now Moses used to take a tent, pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. And talks about that. But there's this little verse, verse 11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. And here's the way I've always read that in my brain and the way I pictured it. And you guys probably already understood it right, but I did not. I read it and saw it as me speaking to God as a friend. Like, go into your tent, speak to God. He's your friend. Jesus says he's my friend. But this says the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. God, like Jesus says, you are now my friend. God is saying, hey, Moses, my friend. I know that's subtle. I know it's like, but I have been sitting with that since April or May when I was encountered with this. Do I hear the voice of God who he sees me as his friend? Not just he's my friend. I don't know. Am I crazy?
No.
It's
yeah. Makes sense.
that again comes back to, oh my gosh, the God of the universe calls me friend. I know there's a song that has that line in it, right? And it's what
Jesus is my friend. There's like a really weird song that went on
there's
YouTube.
No. There's a worship song. He calls me
Probably.
friend. It's actually really deep and profound. But thank you for that one.
Sorry.
No. It's
my job.
but yeah, that's what Jesus is saying in John 15.
Yeah.
I call you friend. And that's what God was doing with Moses. Hey, Moses, my friend. Why would I not want to pray? So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
We got
from-
time for one more.
Yeah. Okay.
This is more a wanting to know more about prayer. There's different kinds of prayer that we see in the Bible. Prayer that we ask for things. Maybe prayer at times when people are lamenting or mad at God. What is prayer aside from asking for things?
Right.
I think is the heart of this person's question. What
Yeah.
other kinds of prayer are there? How can we look at prayer, as you're saying, as this conversation or as this relationship builder, as opposed to as a transactional piece?
Yeah, and I think that is where the Psalms are so helpful to us.
Okay.
Because what we would say, and we talked about this in our series on this last spring, the Emotions series, right? What did we call that series?
My mind is blank right now.
Okay. Yeah.
The seasons.
Yeah. And the point of that was the Psalms give us permission to pray all of our emotions. But I would add to that, the Psalms came about because people prayed their emotions and wrote them down and turned them into a prayer book of the Bible. Right?
Yeah.
They didn't see prayer as different drawers. And that's why even putting that series together was hard, or putting together here's a psalm that's focused on the season of springtime or the season of winter. This is lament, this is despair, this is joy, this is what's hard. What was hard with that series was very few psalms. A few of them are purely psalms of lament. But many of them include lament and asking and joy. So I would just say, again, if you can get yourself in a posture of friendship with God, which requires conversation, there's no relationship without conversation, unless a person has an impediment or a thing. But even then, I've had enough friends with special needs kids, not typical kids, who can't speak. And guess what? They find out how to communicate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you can look at your relationship with God as this, and prayer as conversation, as friendship, then just show up. I think what's hard is that the scripture is filled with the word prayer, praying, all over the Bible. And so our temptation is to just turn it into a religious activity. And so that's where we have to disrupt the language a little bit for ourselves, is to maybe the word prayer isn't helpful for you right now, and you need to say, I'm going to converse with God today. I'm going to meet with God as my friend, and I know he sees me as his friend. Maybe it's just that disruption. But we might be getting too technical. So,
Well, there's a lot of preconceived things when you say prayer, depending on your context or background,
Right.
or prayer to us is different than prayer to Catholics.
yeah.
Like there's a lot of different denominations or
Sure.
whatever will approach that differently. But really appreciate all that, Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks.
If you have anything else, or if you want to plug anything that's coming up,
Well, I
now would be a
have
time
to
to
keep.
do it.
I have to keep. I'm looking at that camera.
Yep.
I gotta plug our spiritual formation retreat. I know I gave a
Yeah.
big plug for it in the sermon, but it truly is one of my favorite things we do, because it's that opportunity as a church family for a number of reasons, especially being a church of one church, many locations.
Right.
It's one, maybe the only event that we do as adults. I mean, we're going to do our 150 celebration this year, but we are together as every campus. And it's so fun during the
So
meals
fun.
to just sit and look at, like that person from Saratoga, getting to know that person from San Mateo. I remember running into these two couples that were just chatting it up at last year's retreat, two young couples. And I was like, oh, do you guys know each other? No, they were from different campuses, just met on the retreat, but had some very common life stuff going on. And somehow they just connected over that. So that's what's so fun about the retreat. And again, our focus this year is on listening prayer. Last year, our focus was Sabbath. So this year, it's on listening prayer, which is really just about how do I enter into prayer in friendship with God, believing that he hears me and he speaks to me. And how do we do that and not get weird or misuse scripture or do stupid things and say, God told me. Don't ever say that. You don't know. He I think, maybe, I don't know. How do we do that in community to help each other in that? So, and then our resources on the website on prayer, I think they're a helpful little tool.
Yeah.
That prayer guide that we're going to use for this series is already available.
Yep.
And it is, I was looking at it this morning. It seems like it's very guided for those that might not be familiar, or just those that want to try something different for these 4 weeks. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Post
the
a
hope.
link in the show notes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Menlo.church/teach us how to pray.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Cheryl, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you guys. Love what you do.
I have a quick shout out actually.
sure.
I was at Menlo Park this weekend and I met a couple folks. They literally, people walk up to me and go, Jessica, and I'm like,
Hi.
do I know you? So I'm trying to train myself to like just immediately ask their name. So Sally Prelo, who used to be on staff here, I met her husband actually, Mark, and he's
Mark,
a
he's the
listener.
best.
And he talked a little bit about too. He loves like the getting to hear what things that you wanted to preach on or like things that you wanted to put in your sermon. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of how this podcast almost started, was especially you. I know you usually say like, oh, I wrote 4 sermons before I decided what I actually wanted to preach on. So that was cool. And then Otzi and Kat, and I think it was either Andy or Andrew and Fielder, who some of them are listeners. Fielder is somewhat new, but he said that he wants to check out the podcast. So if you're listening,
What's up, Fielder?
Fielder
hi.
is a chef at Camper over here in Menlo Park.
You had said that.
Whoa.
And he also recommended to me a dish because I asked him which is. I end up always just getting the burger or something.
Okay.
So
Like burgers.
he mentioned that. I said, what do you think the best thing at Camper is? So if you are in the Menlo Park area, Camper's over on the corner here by the church in the Menlo Park campus. And he said that he thinks they do their pastas really well, which I don't tend to order those.
Okay.
Interesting.
And he named a dish which I cannot even pronounce, but I know I'll recognize
Okay.
it because it's like so that was not me speaking in tongues. That was
I was going to
me
say, is that
trying
another
to
form of prayer?
yeah,
that we
trying
need
to
dive
repeat
into?
the
That's a whole nother series.
It's another series. Trying to repeat his recommendation. But Fielder, chef, yes, chef.
Order pasta.
Yeah, orders pasta if you're at Camper.
At
So thanks for the
Camper.
tip.
Great.
It's fun to
Yeah.
meet him. He's
Cool.
from Alabama.
Yeah. So if you see us on a campus, definitely come say hi.
Yeah.
If you have questions, text us at 650-600-0402. Also, yeah, just like you can obviously ask questions about this series, ask for prayer, or just ask us questions that you want to know about us too. That'd be fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have a great week, everybody.
Yeah.
Text us if you need anything.
Bye.
See ya.